Hi, it's Sunday. It's time to make dinner. Tonight we're going with something that isn't too labor intensive, and we are going to not spend a whole lot of time on here doing it. We're just going to do a pan-seared sirloin. So the one thing that I have done in advance is I preheated the oven to 425 and I put some potatoes in there that I've coated with olive oil, salt, and pepper. They'll get a really nice crispy crust on the outside and should be really great on the inside. So those have been in for maybe about half an hour right now, and they should be ready in about 15 minutes. So for our pan-seared sirloin, we're going to use a cast iron skillet that I have here. Heat's on low. I'm going to turn it up just a little bit. We're going to butcher our sirloins into steaks. Here's what I got. Got this at the store. It is just regular old choice top sirloin. So well, they look fine. I mean, you see right here, there's this little bit of fat we're probably going to trim off, and then probably this little piece here, because when I cut it into steaks, I want you to be able to eat the entire thing. So that's what we'll start with. It's been sitting out for about half an hour. I don't want it ice cold because I want to get a good sear and have the middle start to cook a little bit to get to medium rare. So here we go. So first time I'm opening this package. So I'm looking down, I see underneath there's another little piece here. So to cut this into steaks that I like, we're gonna go probably right here in the middle, and then we'll butcher from there. So these will probably be about 5-ounce steaks by the time we're said and done. Unlike ribeye, where you wanna cook the fat in and have it hopefully melt for flavor, this fat here on the top sirloin is really not gonna be edible and doesn't melt too well. So it is really pointless having it on there. Top sirloin's not one of my favorite cuts of meat, but it was there when I went to the store the other day and ready, and we're gonna spruce it up here with this mushroom gravy that we're gonna incorporate a little bit of the half and half that if you saw yesterday we made mac and cheese and used half and half for it. I reserved a little bit, and we're gonna do a really nice rich mushroom gravy that's gonna have the fat that we're looking for, that we're missing with this piece of meat. So here's where we are right now. I've cut it. So you see, I like the thickness of it. I don't really care for the really super thin steaks because they tend to overcook. And then these little tiny pieces here, you can just kind of peel right off. And that's what I recommend doing. What you don't want to do is cut away too much of the meat. And you're just looking to see if there's anything, like a couple little things like this aren't bad and totally acceptable. So there's steak number one. Here's steak number two. This has actually a bigger piece I'm going to butcher here, and then I actually see this guy underneath. You see right here, I have all of this, and that is really not going to be a nice bite. And for that little bit of meat there, we're just going to take it right off. So that's the one thing when looking for meat. You're looking for not, especially with like a sirloin, what you're looking for is avoiding the line that's going down the middle. And the problem that happens, you run through that, and it tastes like what you'd call gristle, and it's really because you chose wrong. So you should be able to see it in the package and try and avoid that line down the middle. This one just had a couple little ones on the outside. If I really wanted to, I could cut this little piece of meat off and just have it as a little snack or something like that. You know what? Let's do that for him. We'll do that for him tonight. So we're gonna cut off. And anytime I'm working with meat, Buddy makes sure to be around just in case I get the dropsies. So I'm just looking for any of those pieces that don't look that appealing. I'm not going to cook them. Same thing with a New York. So New York, if you see them, they have that kind of line on the outside, and you can't eat that fat. It's not really. If you ever go fine dining, they cut that off for you. Some of the butchers leave a really thick white strip on the outside, and every time I make New Yorks, I'll trim that down. I'll leave a little bit because it's part of the presentation, but I don't like to feel like once it's cooked, it's so much wasted food on the plate. Really kind of a believer, if you put it on the plate, you should be able to eat it. So I'm just going to try and get this little piece off. So one of the reasons that sirloin is maybe a little less expensive than ribeye is because it just isn't, as desirable. It doesn't have the flavor concentration. It's part of the, it is part of the loin, but it's just has a little more chew to it, I guess the best way to put it. So it doesn't have good marbling typically. And that marbling is what gives it good texture usually, because the fat will melt in, you have flavor, and then it'll kind of just melt in your mouth a little bit more with more marbling. Okay, so I've cut this piece off of here. So you can see here, I've cut this piece out. There's still this little tiny bit, and that isn't really edible, so I'm going to cut that guy off too. Cast iron pan's there, so I'm turning it down just a little bit. And then I'm just looking for any other little pieces that I wouldn't want to serve to, if I had royalty coming over. So I'm going to treat us like royalty tonight. All right, so I am good with steak number 2. Let's cut off a little piece for Buddy. He's going to be super happy tonight. And this will be off to the side. All right, so that's one of them that we turn into 2, maybe 5-ounce portions. Here's steak number 2. I'm going to, this looks fantastic here. This part I'm not gonna like. And over here. And let's see, Kansas City strip, supposed to score the fat cap to prevent curling and cook with it. So absolutely, yeah, Mike Taylor just mentioned about the idea of a strip and scoring it. So that, it's the old school versus new school. It's the rustic versus more modern. It kind of goes to what school that you subscribe to. I'm really not a big, I love to eat at steakhouses, but I'm not a big steakhouse cook because I want to be proud of everything I put on the plate and want it all to be eaten. Where you get to those steakhouses and they put the big piece of raw kale on the plate, the old school ones at least. The more modern steakhouses have now gone to preparing it in a way where they cook the steak and then they, some of them will cut it for you, pre-cut it, and then take away the unedible part. So you go to like Peter Luger Steakhouse in New York, which is kind of old school. They take that whole porterhouse and they'll carve it there and they'll give you the edible pieces. You're going to have the New York and the filet, and then they take all this away and it's gone. It's nice, and everything on your plate you can eat, and it's absolutely delicious. So I am going to stop talking for a second and finish butchering here, and then we'll get these steaks on the heat. Because one other thing I did do is I threw some asparagus in the oven as well, and I want to make sure that we're not too far off on our timing. So here I can go this way and then have kind of a not as desirable piece, but what I'm going to do is try and go probably right here. Let's see. The shape of the piece is always dependent on what you're seeing here, so I'm going to make these our steaks. So this one is basically ready. One little tiny piece to cut off. Always when I'm doing this, I'm pushing away from me, because if it does slip, it's going to then slip out instead of slipping in. And then when I'm getting into kind of the finer things, I'm also holding it and cutting away from me. There's that. And this guy's tricky. So here I have one that if I cut off this part here, I'm going to lose so much of the steak. So I may go against my rule here and cook it with this piece on. But I don't love this underneath. I didn't get to see that when I saw it at the store. That was face down. So we're going to see what we can do with it and make it as good as possible. That's one thing that some of these guys are kind of sneaky with, is they're going to obviously put the pretty side up, but sometimes they're hiding something that there's no way you would have picked had you seen it. So that's why traditionally I love buying from the butcher case, where I get to see both sides. But I insist when they're picking up the steaks that they flip it over and show me that other side, because of exactly this. But we'll make do. This will work out just fine. It just takes a little bit more time. the more work and more time you can put into now, the more pleasurable it will be when you're sitting at the table not having to cut around things. All right, so since we're doing a mushroom and cream sauce, I think we're gonna use some Madeira wine is what I found in the cupboard. I was hoping for maybe cognac or something, but I think flavor profile Madeira will be fine. It's a little bit sweet. It's lower in alcohol, so we won't have to light it on fire like you would with cognac to burn off the alcohol. It has about half, maybe even a third of the alcohol of cognac. There we go. Okay, I think I'm good with that. You know what, I'm gonna take a second to do this. Try and get this little tiny piece off here. I'm trying. All right, so I got that guy off, and it's gonna have to do, because otherwise I'm gonna completely tear the steak apart. So right now I'm going to take, when I'm doing this, I have one hand that's my meat hand and one hand that's not. I intentionally don't touch the meat with my hand so that I don't have to keep going back and back and back, and I can still use this hand for things like putting salt and pepper on our steaks. There's the salt. Now I'm looking for the pepper. It looks like you got hidden back here. Here's the pepper. Since this little piece is for Buddy, I'm not going to salt or pepper it. And we're going to do the other side. I'm being pretty liberal here with the application of salt, because what it's going to help do is extract a lot of the flavor out to the surface of the steak while we're cooking. And it's going to kind of give it a quality that you'd have with a dry aged steak. If you can really crust it in salt and it brings that liquid out, it'll still stay juicy, don't get me wrong, but what it's going to do is help create a good sear. All right, so there we go. Other step to creating a good sear is some fat in the pan, oil. We're going to throw oil in to start, and then we're going to add butter in toward the end. So just oil in the pan. This is going to get back up to high. It's going to sizzle. It's going to smoke. We have the door open right now. If we were just doing, like, if I had some really cool Wagyu ribeyes or something like that, what I would do is I would still sear it in this pan, but then I would probably incorporate some herbs and butter right to the pan and then just kind of spoon over the fat and allow it to cook in that method. For this, I'm going to put the 2 steaks at a time in the pan. I don't want to crowd it at all. I'm going to let them cook and then let them rest. And then we'll make our sauce right here in the same pan. That asparagus I said I'd put in is finished. So that's going to come out, and the potatoes are finished also. So I'm going to turn the oven off here. And we are about ready to go. So medium rare for me on a sirloin about this thickness is probably about 4 minutes on each side. Once I put it in, I don't want to touch it. Let it be. You're going to help keep the juices in, create a sear, and you're not going to overcook your steak this way. The more you flip it, the more chance you have of overcooking it, and you'll get a false reading when you do the little test. And I don't know why. Oh, look at that. Tongs were put in the last place that I was. Okay, I'm getting good smoke off here. I'm going to put these in, and they are going to start searing immediately. Here we go. That's going right in. I'm going to do what I think the prettiest side is down first, and that's going to be my my top layer, and then I'll flip over to the back side second. So I'm not overcrowded here. I'm eyeballing this. You know what? I'm going to do all 4 steaks. Why not? And hope I don't overcrowd it. You know what? I'm not going to. I'm going to get it as hot as possible. Do it as hot. Oh, you know what? We're going to do it. What the heck? In the interest of time. bring it down. Here's what the steaks look like. At this point, I could add herbs directly into the pan to get that aromatic if I wanted to. You can see I have a good amount of oil. It's helping create a sear, especially right here. You can actually see the sear right down here being formed. So with that thickness, like I said, I'm probably at 3-4 minutes aside to get to medium rare. So they're just going to sit there. 2, 3, 4. I'll pull the potatoes out. So these potatoes, I only poked the ends. They went in at a 425 oven for about 45 minutes, and I coated them in olive oil, salt, and pepper. And make sure the potatoes after washing them are dried off. And you can see that that salt actually just stays on the potatoes. And it's going to add a beautiful amount of flavor, and then as well as the presentation. So these can sit out no problem for 10-15 minutes because they are blazing hot. They're probably about 210 degrees-ish inside. So they're fine to sit. I don't want to cover them. I don't want them to steam because I want the skin to stay a little crispy. We're just going to do butter, sour cream, and probably some green onions on it tonight. So these guys are still going. I probably have about 1 more minute. I'm going to pull out a few other items here. I do have mushrooms that I'm going to slice, so I'll bring that board over here in a minute. Might as well put the little snack in right now. That'll cook pretty quickly. So for this gravy, I'm just going to use those baby bella mushrooms that I have. If I had beef broth handy, I would use that. I have a can of chicken broth. Why not? I'm just going to use it. It'll work fine. We're going to have a ton of beef flavor in here. I'm just trying to kind of bulk it up. So I'm not going to put a ton of the chicken broth in, but just more about that liquid and kind of making a more complex flavor than just using water. So I think we're good. We're going to turn these over right now. I'm going to move them around in the pan too, so that we're getting even cooked. So this is my hottest spot in the pan. It's going to move here. And this is what I call a sear. This is cast iron pans are awesome because you get such a good sear on them. So that'll keep going, that'll smoke. It is part of the deal. You can run the vent, you can have your door open. If you have a smoke alarm near you, if you're like in a condo or an apartment, probably not a good idea to use a cast iron skillet in your house, but we have plenty of ventilation in here. And the upstairs is going to smell amazing later. I'm getting some chirps from my Texas referee friends. And yeah, I guess I do have skinny legs right now. Thanks, Kenny. I'm just going to slice the mushrooms up here while this is going. I could add shallots or onions or anything like that to this. I'm going to stay super simple and just go mushrooms, Madeira wine, half and half, and I don't know, maybe some rosemary or something like that. We'll see. I do appreciate Kenny checking out my legs while I'm cooking. The other thing that's happening here while I'm searing this is we're getting all kinds of great brown bits at the bottom of the pan, and those are going to go really, really nicely in the gravy. We could also do, if we didn't have Madeira or cognac, we could do like a red wine gravy. I just wanted to pull a little bit of the sweetness out with what we're doing. So these guys are at about 3 minutes right now, 1 more minute, and then I'm going to pull them off. They're going to continue to cook as they're resting, and hopefully all those juices will sear in. The one thing we'll do because of this thickness is we'll give it a test. If you're super confident, which I really am, I can do it by feel method. Like right now, this is still rare. This one's closer to medium rare. That one's rare. And that one's rare plus. And it's, I showed, for those of you watching maybe a week ago, I kind of showed you the method. Just by using your hand, you can see the doneness of the steak. So basically what we're looking at is if you just kind of hold your fingers like this, thumb into forefinger, and then you pinch right here, that's going to be about the feeling of a steak when it's rare. That's medium rare. That's medium well, and then just reach here, and there's your well done. And you'll see how it changes. So, and then this should be like raw if you don't make anything. So that's kind of the method. If you're just using the tongs, you can kind of feel for that. But just to be precise, we're going to use our digital thermometer. I'm going to find the thickest steak that I have and put it right in, kind of at an angle because I don't want to go straight into that gorgeous sear that I just created. I'll bring it down. So I mean, yeah, we're still pretty rare in there. It's only 94 or something. So this has a couple of minutes to go. One thing I can do if I'm not happy with the doneness or I have to rest the steaks for too long, as I make this gravy, I can always take the steak and incorporate it back into the gravy at the very end. It'll help just kind of infuse the two together. It depends. Presentation-wise, I was thinking I was going to slice the steak on a bias and then kind of pour the gravy on top. Whatever you're into is totally fine. So that's going to keep going. Here's what I'm going to do now at this point. So that I have this super thick steak that I had that is still pretty rare in the middle. The great thing with a cast iron is it's not just cooking from the bottom, but these sides conduct a ton of heat. So I'm going to take it and move it to a spot that I can get cooking on the side of the steak too. So it's going to kind of go in that corner. This one is pretty good. And then I'm going to move the steaks that I think are closer to temp and bring them toward the front. And I'm going to move the front of this cast iron kind of away from the heat. So this will be the hot spot of the pan. This will be not quite as hot. You can see I am going to turn the vent on here since I'm getting quite a bit of smoke. A lot of that olive oil is burning off right now. These mushrooms are going to go right into the pan. Asparagus is done. Potatoes are done. I'm going to start pulling a few other things out for the dinner. So just pulling butter and sour cream and the green onions out. Take the green onions that I'm going to use here. I think I like that and put everything else back away. Let's see here. The rubber band will come off. So for finishing on this, I use salted butter for the baked potato, but I use unsalted butter for the pan sauce that I'm going to make. So I have two types. I have both the salted and unsalted. So unsalted butter just allows you to control what's going on in the pan a little bit better. So I think we're good. I'm going to pull these guys out and let them rest. They're going to rest on my presentation side up. I think that's there. At this point, I'm going to go right to putting whatever alcohol in, because this is going to deglaze this pan right now. I'm going to scrape the brown bits and then turn it down. I'm going to add a little bit of fat. I'm going to use olive oil to start into the pan. The mushrooms will be added as soon as that olive oil I feel is hot. And I think we're there now. Here go the mushrooms. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. And then a little bit of chicken broth. Because what I don't want to do is take that Madeira wine and have it all evaporate. So I'm looking for that same sear on these mushrooms. I don't want them to be soggy. That's why I only added a little bit of broth to start, just to kind of make sure the Madeira didn't evaporate. Move them around the pan, make sure I'm scraping up all of these little brown bits from the steak. Remember, you're going to have salt and pepper left over in the pan as well. At this point, I'm going to turn it back up to high to try and get a sear on these mushrooms. You'll hear it start to sizzle. They'll probably take about 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, I'm going to add a little bit of flour and a little bit more of the stock, and we're going to create a roux with some butter. It's going to thicken the sauce a little, add some half and half, whatever herbs we want. Let's play around with that. I love the idea of thyme or rosemary, so I think we'll go with, let's see what we find. Oregano, that's some rosemary. Let me see if I have thyme over here. I do. So I'll add a little bit of let's see, a little bit of thyme to it. Mushrooms are right there. They're almost done. I'd give it maybe 30 seconds. At this point, I'm going to give one last little move around the pan. Awesome. They look good. Heat is going down to about medium. Adding some of our broth or stock. If you had beef stock, that's fine. I'm using chicken stock, no problem. This is kind of the base to our sauce. I'm going to add a little bit of flour to thicken the sauce. So I didn't add all of the broth that I want yet because I'm trying to get this to reduce. You know what? I'm not going to add flour tonight. Let's go with cornstarch. We'll keep it there. So anytime we're adding any kind of flour, cornstarch, tapioca flour, whatever it is, we don't want to put it straight in the hot pan. We want to dissolve it in cold liquid. So I'm going to grab a little coffee cup. I'm going to go maybe a half, 3/4 of a teaspoon-ish of cornstarch and just a little bit of the broth. Now what we're trying to do is make sure I don't have any lumps in this gravy we're making. So here it is. The broth that's in here is reduced. I'm going to incorporate this in. I'm going to turn the heat back up because you want to actually cook this cornstarch mixture. We're getting there. Our last two big steps are to get the butter incorporated and slow melted, and then we'll add the cream at the very end with the herbs. It smells awesome. Okay, we're good here. I'm now going to turn it back down. We're using just a little bit less than a half a stick of butter. It's going to go right in. If you're a huge butter fan, you can go more, no problem. The biggest thing is you don't want to have this heat too high, otherwise it'll separate. So we're trying to incorporate into one big sauce here. Heat's going all the way down to low. You can even remove it from the heat at this point, no problem. I'm just trying to incorporate the butter in slowly. If the butter's at room temperature, it helps even more. This is not one of those things you need to use super cold butter for. We're trying to get a nice fatty sauce. So butter is just about melted. I'm going to add in a little bit of thyme. If you have fresh thyme, that's awesome. Dried thyme works just fine. If you're using fresh thyme, I would recommend putting the thyme in earlier, leaving it on the stem, and then just pulling the whole stem out. And you're going to get all that flavor without the bits of thyme pieces on there. With dried thyme, you want to make sure it sits in the liquid for at least a couple of minutes to help it kind of what I call bloom, or just open up in the sauce. There it is, and now a little bit of that half and half from yesterday. So I have about a half a container of this. I'm going to add it in, and it's at low. All I'm trying to do is warm this up. Add a little bit more. Bring you over so you can see what we've done here. All right, so you can see those brown bits are in. I have no problem with that in this kind of gravy. If we're in super fine French cooking, we don't want that. We're gonna strain it off, but I want flavor, and they're going to help add that flavor in. So there's our gravy. It's not super thick. I don't want thick. If I'm not happy with the consistency here, I can always add more cornstarch, but I'm gonna go with this because it is looking fantastic. All right, so there's that. Let's get to plating. Everything's done. So the last thing I'm going to do with the asparagus is I have some balsamic glaze. So this is just balsamic vinegar with a little bit of sugar and xanthan gum. If you want to make your own glaze, balsamic vinegar, sugar, and probably a roux, but the problem is you're not going to get this awesome color on it. So the glaze I'm going to actually put on the plate. We'll keep it pretty that way. Watch this. Here we go. Let's get the cutting board washed off real quick. Move the veggie cutting board here. Bring my meat cutting board right back in. And here we go. When I cut this guy, it's going to be at a bias here. So this one is about medium, which is great for one of my kids. I'm going to grab a plate. First thing I'm going to do here is put the steak on. What I would like to do is keep this all together. I'm going to use a combination of the knife and the tongs. The knife's going to go right underneath and help me pick it up. The steak's going to go right here on the plate. You can see because I let it rest, I didn't lose too much of the juice. I'm going to give this gravy one more quick little stir. It's on super low. And then I'm going to get a big spoon and spoon it right over the top. Next thing I'm going to do is grab a potato. I'll go here. I want this gravy to kind of be on that potato side. And then the last thing I'm going to do is grab one more set of tongs and put the asparagus on the plate. Asparagus goes on. We're going to give it a little bit of a drizzle with the balsamic glaze. And there you have it. There's our pan-seared sirloin with mushroom gravy, baked potato, and asparagus with balsamic. Hope you enjoy.